Wrestling, the greatest professional wrestlers from throughout the world. And now to the ring for All-Star Action.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome into the AWA Roundtable. My name is Chris Tubbs. I am the creator of the AWA Unleashed podcast. Also the producer. Thank you. Thank you. I am excited to be here today with everybody and to see this fantastic panel. We're going to get stories that we haven't heard before, and I'm super excited for everybody to be here and learn and hear from some of the legends. And that being said, I'm going to introduce it and hand it over to two guys that think they're legends. Yes. My friends, Mick Karch, the voice of Minnesota wrestling, Mick Karch, and the preeminent historian of the AWA and a lot of professional wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, Mick Karch and George Schire. Don't get up.
You know, George and I were talking before we came out. It's hard to believe we're talking AWA stuff, and the AWA has been gone longer than they were in existence, which is really hard to believe. What did they run, 60 to 91, give or take?
1960. Hello?
That's the best you've ever sounded, George.
I can't even figure out the microphone.
Test.
Oh, there we go. All right, sorry about that. No, 1960 to 1991 when Verne Gagne locked the door for the last time and it was over, so.
And on the podcast, we obviously try to keep the memories alive because, you know, this generation, unfortunately, you know, who's Nick Bockwinkel, you know, who's Ray Stevens, and they never say who's Verne Gagne for whatever reason. Everybody seems to know who Verne was, but just trying to keep the memories alive with the AWA, and we think we've got some really good people here that are going to help do it. We'll talk to them a little bit and then open it up for questions for all of you. So looking forward to this. Let me start with the intros. That handsome guy. Yeah, no, you.
He's already lying.
I have known this man for 30-some years. Former producer of the AWA All-Star Wrestling television show along with Al DeRusha. And now he's one of the co-hosts of the AWA Unleashed podcast. Name is Joe Ciupik, but affectionately he is known as Polish Joe.
Yo, Joe!
One of the members that I'm very delighted to be sitting next to here on the right is this young lady who holds the honor of holding more ladies championships than any other lady professional wrestler, and she could rattle them off for you. Just a delightful person, and I loved her in her wrestling days, and she was part of the AWA and some of the other alliances. The incredible Madusa.
This gentleman to my immediate left needs no introduction. You know, I've said a lot of times there's guys who have made a mark in wrestling that have been at the top, that get their glory and what have you. It's only after they've been out of the business for a while that you really appreciate just how good they are and were. And I think this man is a shining example of that. All these years later, it's still not his fault. We need to remember that. He is none other than gorgeous Jimmy Garvin.
Yeah, Jimmy! Go!
Thank you very much. And the final person, certainly not the least, that I want to introduce to my right, a man who, as far as I'm concerned, has been as great as all of them, the Marty O'Neills and the Gene Okerlunds. And tonight he's going to be honored with the Gordon Soley Award.
All right, yes!
And that lays testament to what I just said about the greatness. A longtime friend and a voice for the AWA back in the day, Killer Ken Resnick.
Hey.
Thank you, George. And coming to you, that means everything. Thank you.
As I said, we're going to open it up for questions, but I want to, Joe Ciupik, you explained that there was a little bit of history between you and Gorgeous Jimmy when you started with the AWA.
So, 41 years ago, I'm a 20-year-old kid. The very first interview that I ever was involved with the AWA was the night after Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Mr. Electricity Steve Regal, and got to include Patty in there, but also have to include, with the help of the Freebirds, defeated the Road Warriors for the tag team championships. So I got called in to run camera with another guy, Whippoorwill Brian. Came in to run interviews, and not only was Jimmy one of the on-air talents, but Ken Resnick was the one doing the interviews. So here it is 41 years later, and I feel like my career has now come full circle. I wish I had pictures from that day. They're only up here right now, but I have the honor and the privilege, and we will get a picture of the three of us later together. I get to sort of relive that day as a 20-year-old kid, being in awe, being in the AWA studios and looking at, and by the way, I thought you were an ass, but that was from being a fan looking in. So as Bob Winkle said, you did your job well. And no, it wasn't your fault.
I was a professional ass.
Yes, a professional ass. But anyway, so that's my coming full circle story, and I've been looking forward to this when I found out that Jimmy and Ken were going to be on here. So this is, I get to mark out and be that 20-year-old kid again for the weekend.
All right.
And you haven't changed a bit.
You know, we had Jimmy on the AWA podcast not that long ago, and one subject that was brought up, and I'd like to talk to him again about it. When he and Steve Regal, God bless Steve Regal, you know, we lost him way too soon. When he and Steve Regal defeated the Road Warriors for the AWA Tag Team Championship, there was such an uproar. You know, oh, come on, you know, these guys have been in the ring with the Long Riders, they've been in the ring with Jerry Blackwell and King Kong Bundy, and you mean to tell me that Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal were the guys to beat the Road Warriors? Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, Jimmy, in the scheme of things, that was absolutely brilliant because nobody saw it coming. Of all the teams to wrestle the Road Warriors, who would have figured Garvin and Regal?
Checking. All right. I don't know. You know, when I think about it, the Road Warriors liked us a lot, Steve and I, and they didn't want to lose it to anybody else. I think that, and I understand that too, because if they lost it to us, they knew that wasn't the real deal, because we couldn't have beat them anyway. But if they were, you know, on a tougher opponents, you know, they would think, well, maybe they did ease over. But so I understand how they thought, and that was fine. That was fine with us. We had a wonderful time working with them. AWA was a wonderful time. A lot of stories.
You know, I mentioned at the outset that there are guys who they were stars, that they had their recognition, but in the scheme of things, you know, I look at a guy like you, and yeah, you were on top, but I don't know that you got the appreciation and the respect that you deserved as a professional. I mean, you go back to look at some of those gorgeous Jimmy Garvin tapes coming into the ring with Precious, you know, spraying the gimmick all over the place and fluffing the hair, and you know, the sexiest.
The what?
Yeah. Well, yeah, back at the time. But honestly, I mean, I just think that you were so underappreciated. And when you look at a Jimmy Garvin tape and watch how he controlled the crowd, I mean, this guy was the real deal. And I think all these years later, you look back on it, and yeah, you know what? We really had something when Jimmy Garvin was in the ring.
Well, those are kind words. I appreciate that. it just happened to work out that way. It was my life though. I started wrestling, if anybody's caring, but 9 years old, Joe Scarpa took me down to 106 North Albany in Tampa, which is a sportatorium. And I started as an amateur there, and I wrestled amateur through school. And then I turned pro November 1st, 1969. I was 17 years old. So I worked at it for a while. So I guess working at it for that many years, you need to be at least a little bit good. So I tried real hard to do that, and I also always appreciated the people that I worked for, which was you guys and girls. And what came out.
And I got to talk about Precious for a second.
Okay.
When you were on our podcast, I asked you specifically, is Precious going to join you? And you said no. And we were kind of deflated at that point. I mean, all due respect to you, we're glad you're here. But Precious, on the other hand, where is she today?
She's probably at home now, watching the soaps. No, I'm just kidding. She'd kill me if I said that in front of her. But she's at home. July 6th, we just celebrated our 57th anniversary.
All right, man. Yeah.
I've been with her all my life. She was just turned 14 and I was 16, and we dated for a couple of years and then married. And she's from North Bay, Ontario, and I'm from Tampa, Florida originally, but amazing. And I'm just blessed. I think that's, if I was going to say anything today or any day that I come out and have the opportunity to speak to y'all, I was just blessed. I mean, I'm so appreciative of what I got to experience. That there's, to me, that's just the way it was. It was a great career. And because I'm a little OCD, when I started, I said, well, when I turn 40, I'm going to quit. Because I didn't want to be around, and not be in shape and stuff like that. So, yeah, I did quit on my 40th birthday. And, yeah, 40th birthday, but that's the way that was. But I have to tell you, and I don't want to be boring, and I don't want to eat up a bunch of time. But part of me being blessed is not only the wrestling in my young life, in my young amateur career and a young professional career, and I made a lot of mistakes and I did a few things wrong, but I corrected them pretty fast, and or at least I hope I did, and try to do the best in my work. But flying was what I do. I'm an aviator. That's more than a wrestler, but wrestling took me there. So I really appreciated that as well. I spent the last 25 years flying. And that's a long story, really. I don't even know if you're interested in that. I was taking lessons when I was wrestling, and by the time 4 years before I quit, I bought a Cessna 401, and it would hold about 6 or 7 people. It had a bar and a bathroom and everything. But I would go to the office and I'd say, how much are you going to charge to take these 7 guys, including myself, around for the Great American Bash? Commercial airline ticket, what are you going to spend? And they'd give me a number. And then I would just undercut that number. And everybody wanted to fly with me because I wore a mask when I flew with the boys up, because all kind of smoke would be happening and all kind of things going on, and I didn't get involved in that at the time. So, but that's why they loved to fly with me, because they'd had a good time, and we had a good time. But I had gained, to make a long story short, I gained thousands of hours over that period. And when I quit, and I did my aviation career with NetJets with Warren Buffett, and I flew for him for 20 years. And had a wonderful time. So I've had a wonderful life, is what I'm getting at. I've been blessed. Every day's a gift, and most things don't matter. I say that every day. Every day I wake up, I'm glad, because all my friends, a lot of them aren't here.
True.
And I think about that, and I think how fortunate, how blessed. So you're looking at a blessed man. I'm glad and happy. And,
all right, brother.
And happy all y'all too. I'm gonna be quiet now.
Well, they'd probably be more interested in what you have to say than Mac and Meyer for hire here. But anyway, I am sitting next to, as I said, just one of the lovely ladies of pro wrestling. And it's interesting because all the years that as a young fan, I watched professional wrestling from the late 50s through the 60s and even into the 70s. The ladies wrestling was more of a novelty to come into a territory, to a town, and that's never to take anything away from the ladies like Betty Nicolai and Jean Antone and Kay Noble and Penny Banner, Fabulous Moolah, etc. But the bottom line was they would come into the territory maybe once or twice a year. They'd have a few matches and they'd be gone. It didn't mean a lot. And it wasn't until we got into the end of the 70s, the early 80s, and ladies wrestling started getting the attention that it so badly deserved. And one of the reasons, and I say this with total sincerity, one of the reasons was because of the lady at my right here. She was one of those new age wrestlers, lady wrestlers, Madusa, and I'm going to let her tell her story a little bit, but I want to tell you I appreciate what she brought to the business and all of them going forward to what ladies wrestling is today. And we can thank Madusa for being one of the forerunners of that.
First of all, we're blessed. I'm blessed to be here with him, this man, Mr. Garvin. Jimmy, we're blessed to have you.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know you were talking to me.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I wanted to say that.
Thank
That
you.
was really good.
Thank you.
And well, thank you for that intro. I wouldn't be, and I say this and take this to my grave, I wouldn't be who I am in this business if it wasn't for Verne Gagne. Verne Gagne gave me the chance and believed, and actually I'll back that up. It was Ed Sharkey, I guess, let me take it. Ed Sharkey. But Verne gave me an opportunity and saw something and ran with it. I had no business being in front of that camera, speaking, and I was green. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do it, and I kept doing it, and he kept shoving me in front of that camera. And thank God, because all he did was got better. And then how I got in there, it was the call from Wahoo McDaniel. Wahoo McDaniel and Ray the Crippler Stevens were my boys. They took me under their wing, and I got to hang out with them. There's this young girl hanging out with Ray the Crippler and Wahoo, going fishing. I love to fish. Ray Stevens loved to fish, and so we would fish and do some great things. There were some amazing men there that were so good to me. And the call from Wahoo was, we need you. I heard about you, kid, and we had a VHS tape or something, and we saw what you can do, and we need you to come in and wrestle Sherry Martel for a program, and we need you to take the title. I'm like, oh shit, Sherry Martel? Oh my God, you beat the crap out of me, oh my God. And so, okay. Well, they got word that she was going to New York, I think, so they knew they had to have somebody take the position and get the title, and boy, she beat the crap out of me, pillar to pillar, and I learned the hard way, and thank God. And we were friends up until her last day. And I will never forget when I got my first paycheck from Verne Gagne. It was we wrestled at the Cow Palace, was it the Clash or something?
Super Clash 2.
Was it? Oh, thanks. I can't remember. And then, but my first paycheck, I'll never forget this. It was $800, and I was so in debt because I worked for Ed Sharkey before. And he was such a great manipulator and so bad with money. He didn't pay us. And I love that man, though. I do. We banter back and forth. Yeah, and gosh, that first check, I took that money and bought tombstones for my family's grave. That's what I did. It was so amazing. AWA was, if it wasn't for that, I just wouldn't have all the opportunities in the world. And then I got to work with greats, all these greats. They're great.
Deuce is being really humble here because the first time I saw her wrestle, and it was for an Eddie Sharkey promotion, the Pro Wrestling America, and he was running a place called George's in Fridley, Minnesota. It was a nightclub, and Madusa just started working. This is 1986, mind you, and Madusa is just getting started in the business. And when I say you're humble, it was a year later. I mean, literally 1 year, you're wrestling and you're going over Sherry Martel for championships in 1 year. And coming out of a bar scene or whatever it is. So they saw something in you right from the get-go, and they were spot on. And, I echo everything George has said. The lady wrestlers today are finally main eventing. They should have been main eventing years ago, and absolutely Madusa is one of the trailblazers. And I used to have a show in Minneapolis, SNR, Saturday Night at Ringside, and I had Madusa on there a couple of times, and amazingly, the ratings always spiked when Madusa was on the show.
Well, I was never lost for words. I really spoke my mind.
Oh, you did. You absolutely did. And
imagine that.
We're just honored to have you here, and seriously, I think when you talk about the ladies who have not only blazed the trail in pro wrestling, but done it with dignity and class, and you continue to do it today, still involved in the business, you are a gem.
Oh, thanks. There's one thing in this business that was never for sale with me, and that was my integrity. Sometimes I can get lost in this business.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to add one thing, and I'm really lucky. Since day one, we've had an unbelievable, wonderful friendship. But Madusa referenced it, and I was lucky enough to have a front seat. When she started working with Sherry Martel, those two brought a physicality to women's wrestling that hadn't existed. And I mean that in a good way, not trying to hurt each other, but their style just, I think, as much as any people in women's wrestling, changed women's wrestling, because a lot of fans thought, wow, they can really do that. And I think a lot of other women's stars kind of said, we've got to start doing that. And I think they changed it. And to add, George referenced it, but to give you a bit of a horizon line on my friend, she has a series of records that, they always talk about sports records will never be broken until they're broken. She has a series that will never be broken. She is the only woman to be the AWA Women's Champion, the WWF Women's Champion, the WCW Women's Champion, and All Japan Women's Champion. Because AWA and WCW doesn't exist, so that is a record that can never, ever be equal.
Mr. Ciupik on the end there, Deuce mentioning Wahoo McDaniel, brings me to a point about you and something that you talked about on the podcast. Now, I don't know what you were smoking that day, but what I understand is that you actually asked Wahoo McDaniel to give you one of his chops across your chest. What was in your head that day?
You ever hear the phrase young and dumb? Wahoo came into the control room one day. We had Vegas a couple of nights before, and he had bladed. And remember Wahoo, I mean, he had some good tracks on his forehead. But Wahoo just comes in and ends up just pushing his forehead, and he starts bleeding right away again. Anyway, we get into a conversation, and for whatever reason, I just said, give me a chop, Wahoo. Lay it in there. I mean, I was 22 years old again, young and dumb. thought that I was in good shape and that I could take it. So I stand straight up. I remember it was right back in the corner by the 1-inch videotape, the gauzer that blanked out the tapes. Wahoo just winds up. Oh, I did tell him, I said, lay it in there.
Nice.
Again, young and dumber. So he lays one in there, and literally, every time I tell the story or think about it, I can still feel that chop. He didn't knock me down, so I didn't fully sell it, but I did take a couple of steps backwards. I knew that he laid it in there. Again, why I did it? I'm Polish. That's my only excuse.
That's right, Joe.
Before you put that mic down, Madusa also mentioned Ray Stevens. And I know that you and I were, AWA employees at the time that Ray and Wahoo were kind of doing the booking. But you were a huge fan of Ray Stevens. You saw a side of Ray that a lot of people did not. And we've talked about that guttural laugh of his. Talk a little bit about Ray.
Ray Stevens never grew up. He was he started wrestling when he was 14 or 15. He might have gotten older, but he never grew up. And he had that guttural laugh that if you ever heard it, it was infectious. And you couldn't wait to hear the next one. But you get Ray and Wahoo together, which they often were. When they were bookers with the AWA, they roomed together, and might come as no surprise, but they like to have a cocktail or 20. And the one story that I tell, that they went out and got drunk. They came back, and Wahoo had fallen asleep first on the floor. So what does Ray do? Not get his roommate, his wrestling colleague, a pillow and a blanket to make him comfortable. No. Wahoo or Ray decides to piss on Wahoo. So the morning after this happens, Ray comes into the office, comes into the control room. He's literally laughing, that guttural laugh, and I'm like, what the hell happened to you? He tells the story, and I go, where's Wahoo? Oh, I had to get the fuck out of there. It's like, well, Wahoo is going to be coming into the office. He goes, yeah, I know. So that's the way those two were. They were they were aged kids, is what they were, but loved both of them. And Ray, to this day, that laugh, if you ever heard it, it's like, I wish I could have that laugh. It was that infectious and that wonderful to be around.
Good story, Ken.
We all know, as wrestling fans following the sport in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, we know how important all the wrestlers were. We know how important their programs were against each other, whether they were wrestling each other or tag teaming together. But there was always one ingredient that I always felt was probably the most important thing, and that was the TV announcer. This was the guy that when you turned on your local wrestling, for us it was All-Star Wrestling, the AWA. And I go back as far as Marty O'Neill, who was literally just a household name and a hero. And I always thought nobody could do it better than Marty. He had his famous line, run, don't walk, to get your tickets. And that was right after they did some angle on TV right before the matches, and then you'd get off your sofa, throw down your beer, the chips away, and go get the tickets. And it worked. Marty was followed by, there's a couple of other intermediates in there, but Marty was followed by a guy who you all know, a legend. He turned into a legend. And that was Mean Gene Okerlund.
Yes.
And Marty and Gene, as far as my eyes were concerned, one of them, were polar opposites. They were different in their delivery. They were different in how they promoted the show. They were different in how they got fans to come in. And then around 1984, the earthquake was starting to take place. We realized that the WWF at the time was starting to do the national territory invasion. We know that things were changing quicker than you could dream of. Hulk Hogan was gone from the AWA, Jesse Ventura was gone, and coincidentally enough, Gene Oberlin was gone. And the reason I bring that up and I say this is because the guy I introduced to you a little bit ago, Killer Ken Resnick. When Ken came on board, I remember thinking, you know what? I don't know that I would want to be the man that had to follow Mean Gene. But I'm going to tell you something, kids. Ken Resnick became the voice of the AWA from 1984-5, pretty much till the end when we heard Larry Nelson and the rest of them. But Ken Resnick, he not only filled the spot, he did it well and created his own legend. And when I talk now about the great wrestling announcers, I put Ken Resnick right up there with Marty and Gene and a couple of the others. And I don't say that because he's sitting next to me. I say it because it comes from my heart. And what I want you all to know is he was put into a very hot situation. He had to replace Gene. And I don't know that I would ever want to have that task. But I'm going to give the mic to Ken Resnick, and I want him to tell us his story, and he's a man with many of them. And again, Killer Ken Resnick.
Thank you, George. As I've said many times, coming from you, my friend, I mean, literally, I would say you have probably forgotten more about the AWA than the rest of the table combined knows. So that's high praise. And you certainly speak the truth. When Gene left, I was kind of like, holy shit. Yeah, it was, and I'll talk. Are most of you here going to be at the banquet tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, I talked a lot tonight about what happened, but I was incredibly lucky because I was able to work with and learn from somebody like Jimmy Garvin and Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Heenan and Blackjack Lanza, because I'd been working in the office. I think there was a level of trust that they taught me so much about the business. And I think one of the reasons our friendship is what it is because we were kind of both learning on the job together. So it was, yeah, there were many nights, before TV, I'd be laying awake going, oh my God. I will tell this, people have asked me and I don't talk about it tonight. Was I ever intimidated having to do an interview? And the one that comes to mind was the first interview I did, as they've been talked about, with the Road Warriors. What happened, back then there was no cable TV, super stations, so every wrestling program, the interviews were market specific. So we would have, interview days even in the AWA. Sometimes you had, 50, 60 interviews you had to get done. Well, I've been doing them for, I think, a couple months and gradually learning and trying to get better. And then the Road Warriors came to TV. They had just flown in from somewhere and were literally on a layover. So they only had a few, hours to get everything that Verne and Greg needed done. So as soon as they came in, Greg said, quick, get made up. They came back and he said, all right, first interview is for the match in Salt Lake City against so-and-so. So I never had a chance to introduce myself. And the Road Warriors, not a reputation they were difficult to work with, But they were the freaking road warriors, okay? Here's, Animal and Hawk and the shoulder pads and Paul, and it was like, all right, so the countdown, 3, 2, 1, and go. So I plug the match, and I bring them in. And I think Paul could sense that I didn't know where I should try and take this. That it's the Road Warriors. And Paul later admitted he did, and he did it to do me a favor. But in his way, as he walks in, I started to say something. He said, "Do you know why God gave you that nose? So you could keep your big mouth shut." And then they kind of went on and just took the whole interview, and I paid it off. And then, Paul came up to me and he said, "Hey, just relax," and introduced me to Joe and Mike. But that was because even though you were on the quote unquote inside, they were the Road Warriors. And until you had a chance to know them, or more importantly, them know you, it was like that was the literally kind of overall taking over for Gene was the oh shit moment. But that was really the oh shit. Yeah.
In June of 1984, and I don't know if Ken will remember this, my first appearance being interviewed on television was Ken Resnick. And the reason I was on TV, George and I were hosting something called Supervention. It'd be a big wrestling convention in the Twin Cities. And I look at the tapes right now, honest to God, I'm just so embarrassed. I'm standing there, I got a black suit, I got a black beard on, I look like I should be at somebody's grave. I mean, really, it was that horrible. Ken kind of led me through the interview when we talked about how we're going to process this and the events and so on and so forth. And then Ken came up with the idea. He said, "Why don't we spice this up a little bit, and we'll have somebody do a walk-on at the end of your interview." I don't know why they needed to spice it up other than the fact that we were the shits. But speak for yourself. Oh, I am. But Ken said, "Let's have somebody else do it," and it turned out to be Jesse Ventura. Now, what was interesting about this, Jesse came in at the end of the interview, and our convention was going to have an award ceremony as well. So Jesse, of course, comes in Jesse fashion. He says, "You don't need to have an award ceremony. You don't need to vote, blah. I'm Jesse the Body. Look at me. Just give all the awards to me." And he walks out. It was Jesse Ventura's last appearance in the AWA. So you talk about killing a territory. We certainly did that, because right after that, after Jesse does this walk-on, he gave notice or he left. He never came back again. So he wouldn't have been there to get all the awards for him anyway. But yeah, that was the first appearance. And I want to say something else about Ken. And especially in today's wrestling, announcers, myself included, tend to go over the top. And I've been accused of that all the time about the oversell and whatever else. Following Gene Okerlund, Ken, again, he had a hell of a job in front of him. But if you look at Ken's history and you watch him on television, he was so understated. He just stood there, he would ask the question, this is Marty O'Neill-like. He would ask the question and then take a step back and let the talent run with the interview. And that's the mark of a true professional, and he maintained that kind of approach to the business throughout his entire career. So Ken is absolutely, he's not a Joey Styles, he's not, Excalibur or whoever else, screaming at the top of his lungs, but he got the point across, and he sold tickets, and, they're honoring him tonight, and he deserved it.
So we have went around and had everybody give a little bit of a talk, and what we'd like to do right now is, all of you out there, if you have a question, where each one, certainly you can ask Mick and I if you have a question, but we prefer that you go out and reach out to Ken and Madusa and Jimmy and Joe Ciupik as well. Let's hear what they've got to say and answer your questions. But please be polite, raise your hand, and we'll call on you. And I see one right away, so go ahead, sir.
All right, hold on. I'll come over here.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Who is that guy?
All right, go ahead.
Question for Mr. Garvin. Thank you all for being here, first of all. I moved out of the territory, if you will, right when you guys were moving in. So I didn't see you much in the AWA, but I saw you a lot in WCCW. You had one of the great ring entrances when you did the Hello America thing, which I thought was better than It's Not My Fault. Could you do a Hello America for me?
No, I don't remember that. I swear I don't know if I smoked.
It's when you were with the other blonde.
Oh, Sunshine?
There was a couple of them.
With Sunshine.
Yeah, I smoked.
You'd come into the ring in your
Well,
and you'd go, "Hello, America."
No, you sure?
Oh, I'm positive.
Maybe it's the altitude from the airplane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Please don't make me tell you you're wrong, okay?
You're probably
I'm not
right.
wrong. I just watched it.
Okay, who else? Who else has a question? Chris, right up here in front.
Yeah, we'll go front, and then I'll work my way back.
Yes.
This is kind of for all of you. I know Jimmy alluded to that the Road Warriors liked them, they allowed them to put them over. How about talking in contrast to that with the Fabulous Ones, like how that?
I want Jimmy to talk about that because I know he can tell some good stories, but I want to add something here. When that feud, that program has been alluded to, the night in the St. Paul Civic Center when Jimmy and Steve took the title, the thing that made it so special was because the Freebirds were there. And they had wrestled the night before. The Freebirds in Chicago had wrestled against the Road Warriors. And strangely enough, they brought that feud right into St. Paul the next night. And that was part of the reason that we were given that they interfered. But Jimmy, I know you can talk about that in detail.
You think? All right. What is the question again? Let's try.
So just in contrast from you guys worked with them and they put you over.
Yeah.
But then they had when they were asked, I think at one point the Fabulous Ones were asked to be put to win the belts from the Road Warriors, and that didn't go over very well.
They didn't do that. Yeah. Well, I guess that just how they felt about the two teams. I mean, that's the best way to say it. I mean, myself and Reeves, we were pretty tight with them, and we didn't carry a whole bunch of heat around. You know, we helped them harmless. Maybe they didn't feel the same about the other guys. I wasn't involved in that, so I can't speak on it. But they probably did it because they just had some big players.
The reason that worked so well, not only did the Road Warriors respect Garvin and Regal, but and even though they lost to what visibly was a physically inferior team, it's because you had the Freebirds go in there that made that work. Without the Freebirds interaction at the end of that match, it would have been like, what the hell? You know, I mean, come on, this is bullshit.
They said that anyway.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't your fault.
But that's true.
But it's because you could still rely on the Freebirds to say, well, or Verne could, that this made it more plausible. And in fact, the interview afterwards, Hawk said, let's see, let me see if I can get this right. Who could beat either him or me unless they had a gun?
That was Hawk. That was Hawk.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, and when you mention that program between Regal and Garvin and the Road Warriors, the one thing that some of you have heard me say after we've talked about this ever on a podcast, one of the most genius promoting moves that Verne Gagne did at that time was, again, in the eyes of the fans, the Road Warriors were unbeatable. Their whole entrance, the way they just went in and kicked ass, they really had their own rules. They appeared to be unbeatable, and they were believed to be unbeatable. And so the logic was, if you put the title on them, who in their right mind would ever believe they could be beat because they were the Road Warriors? You might think sometimes, well, maybe they shouldn't have been the champions. But when they got the title, as good as it went over, when you have a good team like Steve and Jimmy who came in there, again, it's not taking anything away from them. They were doing their part. But to the fans, they couldn't beat the Road Warriors. And when you add in the combination of the three Road Warriors, that night in St. Paul, the Road Warriors were beat, but it took 5 guys. Then it's believable. And then they were great champions because I don't care what you say, if you're the underdog, the fans always think you can be beaten. They found a way not to be defeated. So it was genius promoting. So.
And it opened up the angle with the birds.
Exactly. Then they had the Road Warriors and the Freebirds. So it was, and that's the way wrestling was in that day. There was always a storyline, and the angles had to coincide with one another. Who else has a question?
All right, any more questions? Yeah. Come back over here quick.
First of all, thank you. You talked about market-specific promos, and I'm just curious from Madusa and Jimmy Garvin, from your point of view as talent, and Ken Resnick as the interviewer, were those fun days? Were those stressful days? And and anybody else who, apparently Joe has ideas too from a production standpoint. And what did you tap into in order to be creative so that you're saying something a little different every time?
The interview process is, every individual has their own way of reaching whatever place they need to be to portray what they're trying to, the message that they're trying to deliver. So everybody is different on that. I didn't have anything special, but it was not me talking to start with. It was the character talking. It was I kept myself completely, believe it or not, separated. Like, I didn't smoke pot, but my character did.
That might be the greatest excuse I've ever heard. I'm going to try that when I get home and see if that goes over.
Wow, I'm glad I never smoked that. Oh my God. Anyway, so interview day was very nerve-wracking for me because, again, I was just learning in my first time, and being in front of that camera, it was a day where sometimes you had the other talent waiting because they had to do theirs. And so that pressure was on you. So of course I wasn't a one taker. I was a 20 taker. And I was bad, but I got better and better and better. So those days were stressful, but I enjoyed them. And gosh, so sorry boys back in the day if you had to wait for me. So.
Well, I can tell you the way the business worked back then. If she hadn't gotten better and better as a talker, she wouldn't have had the success she did. And she was sometimes 2 or 3 takes, but that was about it. The biggest problem with market-specific interviews was for the biggest stars or whatever was going around on top. I mean, there were days when Jimmy and Steve and I would have to do interviews about their upcoming match with the Road Warriors for Chicago and for Denver and for Salt Lake and for Milwaukee and for Winnipeg, that it was hard because when you're talking basically, they were talking about basically the same thing. I would set the stage coming up in Salt Lake, coming up at the Winnipeg Arena. That kind of made it tough because, like Jimmy said, you needed to be, as emphatic about every single match because it was just going to air in that market. So that was one of the things that, really made it hard. And like Madusa said, it was a long day because, the guy, what was on top, they may have to do 15 interviews, but 9 of them were basically about the same match.
And the only difference really between the interviews to the different markets was Okay, in Milwaukee, you've got to mention George's Bar and Grill as the sponsor, and then in Wausau, this other one. And when you brought up the question, I just have this vision of Verne going, oh, jeez. So, you know, that's why Verne went bald after all the years of that slap on his forehead. But you always had to make sure that you got in his local buddies that are going to be there, and if you didn't, he'd get upset. But the interviews themselves, pretty much the same thing. You know,
but you needed the enthusiasm. But you know, Joe, you're right. To most of you, Verne's signature move was the sleeper hold. To those of us that were there, Verne's signature move was when he didn't like an interview, go, Jesus, what are you doing? He literally stopped the interview and started pounding his head. And I always used to say, for a lot of the boys, you know, they had some, you know, memory issues and things, you know, from chair shots. Verne was just for punching himself, because we would screw up a lot of him. Jesus Christ, what are you doing?
On average, how long was an interview day from start to finish?
Oh my! In AWA, we would start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then go till like noon, and we'd have an hour for lunch where people could go or whatever, and then it ended when all the interviews were done. Sometimes, depending on how they went and the number, we'd get done about 4:30, and there were sometimes we'd get done about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But I would tell you, they were a lot shorter than WWF interview days.
Yeah, long days and just monotonous from all of the repetition. But the boys always seem to find a way to have some fun, whether it's Buddy Rose pulling down his pants at somebody who's doing their interview for the first time to try to break them up, or as a camera operator, having Adnan behind you with his sword trying to stick it up your ass as you're trying to count down to the next interview. Boys will be boys in interview day, and girls, but interview day was a lot of work, but they had their fun.
You know, the one thing I wanted to point out too about those long interview days, and of course, as Ken pointed out, you're talking all the different markets and doing sometimes maybe the same tape or the same interview for different cities, but I've got to give credit to all the boys and the ladies in the business who could go out there and ad-lib a promotion or promote their card with just knowing the town and the date and the opponent and where they were in the feud and what was going to happen. And they didn't have long scripts and have to memorize, you know, page after page of text. So I think that really is something that's a lost art, but these guys, they did it. They had usually 2 or 3 minutes, if that, they were getting the wrap up. And they were so professional at it, and I think that's something we need to applaud them all for.
I got a few more questions out here as well. Go ahead.
My question's for Ken. I'm back here. Sorry. Could you speak a little bit to your transition into wrestling announcing and what that was like for you? Was there some advice you got along the way that really kind of helped you kind of formulate your style there? Was there a piece of advice you got? Was there somebody you tried to emulate? Just how did you make that transition so smooth? Because we see a lot of people try that same transition that you made from sports into that, that haven't done it so well. So
I was lucky, and I'll talk about it in depth tonight. I'm not trying to avoid it. Most of you are going to be at the banquet. So I don't want you to hear it now and then fall asleep tonight. I was lucky, and like I alluded to, because I'd been working in the office, I got tremendous help from people like Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Heenan, that sometimes I would do an interview that was acceptable production-wise. Verne didn't, give himself a concussion over. But oftentimes on a break, Bobby or Nick or Mad Dog or Crusher that, I had great relationships with would say, that was good, but remember when whoever said this, what do you think it would have been if you would have done that? So, you know, that's where I was really lucky. And I also think part of it was because it was a different time that, you know, the talent wasn't on guaranteed contracts. They would get a percentage of the gate. So everybody, you know, even Jimmy, if they didn't like each other, you knew the better the interview was, the better your match was going to hopefully bring fans back the next time. So everybody kind of had each other's back. So I had a lot of people helping me, but one really quick story, it wasn't all grind them out. We had some fun, and one of my favorite stories, and Bobby got so mad at me because it was really the only interview where I just broke up in the middle and completely lost it. Like, you know, started laughing, we had to do it over. I was doing an interview with Bobby, and for whatever reason, Nick wasn't there that day. So Bobby was doing all the interviews about Nick's matches. And it was around the holidays, and we're going on, and you know, in the middle of an interview and back and forth, and I'm kind of challenging Bobby. And all of a sudden, Bobby said, "Oh, geez!" And you know, I jerked back because I didn't know if something had happened, or he thought of something, or he was staying in gimmick. So I kind of said, "Is something the matter?" And he said, "Did you get a Christmas card from me yet?" And I was like, "Well, no, as a matter of fact, I didn't." And he goes, "Yeah, and you won't either." Laughing so hard, and Bobby got so mad at me. He said, "That was great. Why did you stop laughing?" I said, "Because it was so great." I said, "Well, do it over." And he said, "No, you'll never have the reaction." So we did have some fun doing them.
All right, got a couple more questions here. Yes.
Ken, Bockwinkel was way ahead of his time, I think, when it came to the interview. He was not a screamer. Talk about what it was like interviewing Nick.
Nick was always a challenge, but in a good way. Nick at times would get so engrossed in what he was saying, he would start listening to himself. You know, and just kind of, so you had to really be on the ball, because you never knew what direction it might go. And also, when Nick would get into being so interesting, he would start listening to himself. He would forget that we had to get out of the interview. And, you know, that they're wrapping up, and Nick is not seeing it. So I would always stay close enough to Nick so I could, if need be, step on his foot to kind of bring him back. And I will tell you this true story about Nick. In AWA days, because you had to have Canadian content in order, like, for the show to air in Winnipeg. So we would always do the Winnipeg Arena on Thursday night, and then we would do TV shows at a high school in Winnipeg that they could put in the Winnipeg show to cover the Canadian content requirement. And it was a typical high school, big gym, and then there was a stage at the end, you know, raised up where they would do plays and things like that. So instead of sitting ringside, Nick and I were a ways back up on the stage. And yeah, it was a talent against an enhancement talent match. So it, you know, it wasn't. Well, Nick got into speechifying about something. The match ends, 3 count, the bell rings, the wrestlers leave, the referee leaves, and Nick is still talking. He was so into himself that he just kept going. And the producer is in my ear saying, "Just let him go, just let him go. This is absolute gold." So finally he gets done, and he looks at the ring and he goes, where is everybody? And I just say, well, I guess we'll be back.
I just want to say something about Nick Bockwinkel and his vocabulary. You know, he admitted that he carried around a little dictionary, and every once in a while before an interview, he'd look up a word, and then he'd figure out a way to put that big word into his interview. But Mick and I had a very special occasion with this man the night or the afternoon that we went to his house in Mendota Heights. And we walked in, and there was Nick in all his glory in a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants, and he proceeded to spend 20 minutes telling us the virtues of a Hungry Man Swanson TV dinner. So, and he did it with a vocabulary that was a little bit richer than you and I had then and probably still. So he was a unique man, but yeah, interviews were a classic.
I had a great experience with Nick Bockwinkel. I was living in Japan wrestling for 3 years, and he actually refereed one of my matches in Japan. And I was more scared of him, believe it or not, than I was wrestling the Japanese girl, meaning that I'm a totally different character in the ring. And I got up, I turned around because he was in my way, he didn't move quick enough. I got up in the middle of the match, jumped up and slapped him. You don't slap Nick Bockwinkel. And he just looked at me and froze. And he just stood there and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I just looked at him, I'm like, "Go with it." And I went back and wrestled. After that, he came up to me. He said, "Miss Madusa, if you ever slap me again, that will be your last match." I said, "Sir," and I knew he was serious. But then we were good friends after. Oh my God.
I'll take this and then,
Go ahead.
then I'll go up front.
I come to the Hall of Fame weekend in Waterloo from Omaha, which was a primary AWA market, and spoke to an old friend recently. And he said that when the Civic Auditorium was torn down, the old film reels were unsalvageable. So that's another lost wrestling media story. Basically, what was it about markets like Omaha or any of the primary ones where the AWA is discussed, you always hear about the markets? Was it the venues? Was it the population? Was it the crowds? Was it the gates you would bring in? And before you all answer, I'd just like to say that I'm a backstage interviewer and a commentator for my local independent promotion. Two people that inspired me were Ken Resnick and Mick Karch. So thank you, guys.
I think we're gonna. I know you guys have a meet and greet to do, so we're gonna kind of cut this a little bit short. But thank everybody here for helping us keep the AWA alive. You hear about the old days in WCW and NWA. Herb, have you got a question, Herb?
One comment, one question.
Yeah.
I think a panel like this is why we all mark out. You guys are great. The other thing is a question real quick for Ken and for Jimmy. We talk about all the greats in the business, but what was your experience with Bruiser Brody and your interview process, and then you being in the ring with him off and on, Jimmy?
Well, Bruiser lived at my apartments in Tampa when he was in Florida. And my dad had built the place. It was a main house with 2 or 3 apartments, and they were real nice. And the wrestlers liked to stay there. Bruiser stayed there, and John Studd stayed there. And unfortunately, Angelo Mosca stayed there.
Go Canada.
No, but I lost my train of thought with the Mosca thing. I'm sorry. Brody. Well, Brody was an individual on his own as well. You know that. Everybody knows that. He was a fantastic man. I was in Japan with him too once, and he was just he was a great guy. There's a lot of stories about him, but he was steady, and he didn't veer too much off of what he liked to do, working out or eating, and his program and what he was thinking. He had his own way that he went through the world, and it was pretty good. I have a lot of respect for him, immense respect for him. He was a great man.
All right.
I had a great relationship with Bruiser Brody. Part of it stems from the experience I had with the very first interview with the Road Warriors. When Bruiser came into the AWA, he was here at the start of TV, so I'm going, I'm not going to make that mistake. So I went up to him, introduced myself to him, and I said, if you have a minute, tell me how you like, tell me how you like to do your interviews. And he kind of leaned back and he said, nobody had ever asked me that before. So we sat down and I told him how I kind of did it and how he would like to do it. And I got along great with him. He was an extremely intelligent man, where when we had little breaks, sometimes we would sit down, we would talk politics, we would talk the world, and it was interesting, especially being here in Waterloo. You'll enjoy the fact that while Bruiser Brody went to Iowa State in Ames, I was at Drake University in Des Moines. So we had a common bond. Now I've got to be wonderful friends with his wife, Barbara, and because of the relationship I had with Frank, one of my favorite pictures was we were doing an in-ring interview, and in the middle of it, he kind of broke gimmick and just put his arm around me and then continued on with the interview. So he was terrific.
So everybody, well, if you remember Bruiser Brody, or King Kong Brody, whatever version, when he came out to the ring, I always wondered how he developed his entrance, and it was always hush, hush, in the Wild Man. So I had the pleasure a couple of years ago of interviewing his wife, Barb, and I asked, so how did he develop this? How did that come about? So you'd think it's like some masterful plan, right? Well, apparently, one time he's walking out to the ring, and Barb, correct me if I'm wrong, but he just clears his throat. And like the way that it sounded, and that just developed into his character. So, yeah, so nothing brilliant, but whenever you bring up Bruiser Brody, you think of when he's doing his ring entrance and do, hush, hush. That's how he got it. That simple.
Regarding Brody, I think even today, if you watch AEW, Brody King comes into the ring and does the same bark. The same kind of deal. John Nord did it. So in a lot of ways, Bruiser was a trendsetter just from, clearing his throat. I just want to thank everybody here, because we are dyed-in-the-wool AWA people, and I hate to say it, we're a dying breed. Again, the AWA, it's 35 years ago. And whenever anybody references old school, all of a sudden, old school is like 2010. I mean, old school, yeah, I remember Hulk Hogan. Well, that's not what we're talking about. But we appreciate you being here and keeping the AWA alive. It meant so much to us growing up, and to be on the panel here with Ken and Deuce and Jimmy and Joe, and yes, even you. It's our pleasure, and thank you for being fans of the AWA.
All right, thank you.